Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Um, this is the City of Jacksonville Beach Community Redevelopment Agency workshop for Wednesday, March 12th, 2025. It is 3 p.m., so we've got a little bit of an agenda to address this afternoon. First of all, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Gary Paytel,
Here.
Mr. Ron Whittington, Mr. Thad Mosley, Mr. Kevin Myers,
Here.
Ms. Megan Edwards, Ms. Sydney Talcott, here, and Mr. Marcus Campview.
Here.
I'm going to maybe diverge just a little bit from the agenda, and I'd help me, Taylor, because I believe you have some additional information for us as it relates to the legislative considerations that are going on at the state level.
Yep.
If you'd like to just present that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so I will hand these out at some point during this meeting, but to not delay us too much from getting to our couple of items, there are two bills, one in the House, one in the Senate. Senate Bill 1242 and House Bill 991. They are mirrored of one another. Basically, the overall goal is terminating CRAs and a lot of restrictions. For us as a CRA, truly the termination date is honestly not that huge of a red flag for us. We expire in 2047. This forces all CRAs to expire in 2045. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're going to battle something that just really seems like not necessary, it puts a moratorium on creating any new CRAs. You know, again, I know there are a lot of communities that would hinder us, not so much. The biggest thing for us is, as this reads, it says, effective October 1, 2025, CRAs are prohibited from initiating any new projects or issuing new debt. So that would mean that whatever our project list and our plan looks like on October 1 of this year is what we have to work with until the year 2045. So I have written, and I'm not sure if I can hand out my letter yet. The city manager is taking a letter that I wrote to pass out to the agency, the council, our local representation. The FRA has reached out to staff members across the state regarding CRA issues. So I'll share it with FRA, Florida League of Cities, our friends at the Southern Group, all of the committees that are involved in this process as well as the representatives that initiated these. My letter will go to all of that massive list, and it really just lists out why this is a hindrance to agencies across the state. And, you know, really one thing I touch on is that if it's passed in its current form, this bill will stifle redevelopment, but can also negatively impact local economies, hinder tourism growth, and prevent communities from achieving revitalization efforts originally envisioned. You know, I urge them to reconsider the language. You know, it's not something that we're saying, hey, don't put any restrictions in place, because if they're wanting to restrict different things as far as expanding districts and creating new districts, I'm sure there has to be reasoning there. The biggest thing for us is the restriction of new projects. If we're in place until 2045, if this passes, or 2047 if it doesn't, at least don't hinder all agencies to never do another project. If worst case scenario, if it passes, then we've got some ideas that I will not say right now because we're being recorded, but we have, I'm kidding, but we have ideas in place. So we will keep everyone up to date on that. Like I said, I've got two summaries, and then I've also got the email that redevelopment professionals, the staff side that we're getting. So I will make sure you guys get these before our meeting is over. And I believe that our consultant, Mr. Gilmore, would like to speak. Thank you. Perfect. It's not me. I didn't touch it. All right, you're done. Just kidding. But like I said, I will pass all this out to you guys, and then we will, as this continues. I know it made it through on the Senate side. It made it through the first committee reading. It was a 4 yes, 3 no vote. So almost it barely squeaked through the first committee. I believe the next committee in the Senate is the Judiciary, and they've got it on their agenda now. So we will keep you guys up to date, but we are very aware of it and staying on top of all the changes coming, and we will keep you up to date on what's going to happen there.
Taylor, thank you. I appreciate it because I was just made aware of it late last week and quickly dove in. I didn't have a lot of information. I quickly dove in and tried to figure out exactly what the bill says. And if you take the actual lined out version of it and read it, it's not very clear. It's very difficult to understand exactly what they're proposing and what direction it might go. I did take the initiative and have already voiced my opinion in reference to this to our local state senator Clay Yarborough, as well as the members of the House that was going to be hearing the bill yesterday. So they all heard from me. We'll see where it ultimately goes. But I think each of the board members, agency members, should take a look at it and get familiar with what's being talked about. It's funny how these things just come out of, so to speak, left field sometimes, and doesn't really address the local conditions or situations. It's a reactive thing, in my opinion, from issues that are happening elsewhere in some other CRAs, not here locally. And then on top of it, the state is already requiring that we submit audited reports on a yearly basis as well as annual reports, so they know exactly what we're doing and at what level we're at, and that financially it's sound and it's in accordance with the state statute. So again, just take the time. This is something I think that surprised everybody and has kind of taken a little bit of the wind out of the sails a little bit, but hopefully we can get all back on the right track. With that, I'd like to move forward with our agenda for this afternoon. We have two items for discussion this afternoon, the boardwalk activation as well as discussion about First Street. And let me just start by saying that, this is an opportunity for us to do some brainstorming. We don't always get to do that in our meetings, but a chance for us to really talk about what is important to us to ultimately make the downtown a better place. It's an opportunity for everybody to voice their opinion. My opinion may not be the best, but maybe we can build on it and come up with a better solution that will ultimately really work for the downtown. So I'd like, want this to be an open discussion for everybody. Ideas will be bounced around. And hopefully we'll leave here with some good direction for both staff and then ultimately things that could be moved forward to the council level. From my perspective, this needs to be a holistic vision, something that encompasses, taking these pieces individually. I don't think solves anything. I think we've got to take it as a whole. We need a good ultimate plan and design. We need a good action plan, and then how the implementation is going to be done. And then ultimately, we also need to think about long-term maintenance. So as we get into our conversation, I think it would be good to kind of keep those things in the back of our mind, and hopefully we can address them in some way as we continue the conversation. I want to commend staff. I read through all the documentation. Taylor, thank you on everything that was done in reference to the boardwalk activation as well as First Street. And I thought the information that was presented there is a great starting point for us to have our conversation. It brings forth quite a few great ideas, number of different options. And I think it's for us to discuss it and see if we can build on it or just accept what staff has recommended and ask them to move forward with it. So with that, I'm going to open up the discussion. Well, let me backtrack. Taylor, do you have some things that you want to add in reference to? Well, we'll start with boardwalk, since that's number one on
Sure.
the agenda. If you want to fill us in on anything.
Yeah. Thank you. I think first and foremost in the memo that's in your packet, we've kind of tossed around several different ideas of kind of what this process was going to look like. And what we really landed on was trying to make sure we had the most efficient order of steps, if you will. And so this is essentially step one in that process where we're presenting this topic to you guys for discussion. We hope to be able to take away from today's discussion kind of a shortened list of ideas, topics, and things that you would like to see expanded upon. Then at the next hospitality industry meeting downtown, we plan on having it. And if for some reason that's scheduled like 3 months out, which I don't think it is, then we would individually set up meetings with the hospitality industry, business owners, whoever in the downtown to kind of talk with them a little bit, and then based on feedback from the businesses, from the CRA, then we will then draft those proposed changes because ultimately this is changing an ordinance. And then we would take those proposed revisions to City Council at a briefing in the future, have their feedback at that briefing, and then the step would follow just like a normal City Council ordinance being updated. You would have a first reading and then a second reading 2 weeks later. So that's kind of the approach. And then in your packet, we kind of explored, what is activation? That is a very broad term, and there are a lot of ways you can define that. So we kind of took what we've heard from council as far as the strategic plan and the vision that they have for downtown, and we kind of honed in a little bit on the type of activation that seems to be kind of those overarching themes that they would like to see. We then talked about the use area a little bit. We looked at a little bit of some pros and cons. In the use area, when we get to that section, we've got some restrictions as far as the fire marshal is concerned for emergency vehicle access. And then we've got an example of phasing out this approach. Obviously we don't want to overwhelm and swamp everything at once. We want to be strategic with it. And then we've got sort of a plan of how we could have temporary uses on the boardwalk. So
One thing I'd like to just clarify in reference to the boardwalk is there were some, somewhere in the documentation it talked about the fact that from a safety standpoint that there needed to be at least 15 feet that was maintained for first responders and so forth to have access to the
10
boardwalk.
or 15.
If you go from beach to the pier, that is roughly 21 feet plus 15 feet. 21 feet from the edge of the structure to that point where the concrete banding is, and then another 15 feet before you get to the dunes. But once you go north of the pier, it's only 15 feet. So as we talk about the boardwalk, are we really just talking about the area between beach and the pier? Because there, based on what's out there now, what's existing right now, we really can't do anything north of the pier because that's only a 15-foot wide strip
right.
that occurs up there. I don't know if you can provide any clarification on that.
No.
Yeah, so the best I can kind of show, wrong mouse. So on the screens, you'll see in majority of the sections of the boardwalk, not every single one right in front of Latham, it's not there, but where you've got this concrete band down the middle, per the fire marshal, anything west of that concrete line down the center of the boardwalk is fair game. Anything to the east of that has to remain an emergency travel lane. So when you get into that section north of the pier parking lot, there isn't room for this anymore. So it really has to be only in those areas where you can still maintain that travel lane for emergency vehicles.
So it's really just the area up to the pier that we're talking about and trying to find some way of activation
Mm-hmm.
of it. Okay.
Just a quick question about that. Is it an option or something to explore for that area where we don't have the 15 feet to like lean more on the the various businesses along the boardwalk to take on the onus of the activation.
Mhm.
So if that's seating or something like that, does that fall into the scope or?
No, because they wouldn't be able to encroach on the boardwalk.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
there, if it's only 15 feet in those areas, then they can't do anything there anyway.
Got it. So it would be instead like boardwalk adjacent activation, but that's not in the
Yeah.
scope of this. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Gary, Matt, say a couple of things, please. I spent a few hours last several days up and down the area at different times of day. First, the mural on the Seawalk Pavilion side is beautifully refreshed. Somebody did a great job on that. Megan, do you know who did that? Or who made that happen?
I'm sorry, I'm going to be very honest. I completely missed your question. I had a question from the city
Okay.
clerk come through at the exact same time. I apologize.
No problem. The back of the Seawalk Pavilion looks very nice.
Yes.
That's all I had to say on that.
Thank you. Thank you to
Two
Parks
other
and Rec.
things that really struck me. The problem that we have with the Seawalk, and to a lesser degree with First Street, but still very much so with First Street, is elevation. The dunes are great. We need the dunes. If you look at the old pictures of the beach, you see a cutaway seawall, no dune whatsoever, and all the arcade and all that area looking straight out at the ocean. There's not much we can do about that, but there are two things that we should think about. One is the best elevation currently available is up the ramp to the pier and up the dune crossovers. Now, there are 4 dune crossovers at I think 3rd, 5th, Casa Marina, and 7th. They're the old wooden ones that are deteriorated and in at least 2 cases are not usable as hall. So I think that we, as the CRA, should recommend that the city pursue the replacement of those 4 walkovers. That'll provide some degree of elevation and enable people to see the ocean when they're walking up and down the boardwalk more freely than they can now. The other thing is that all the one-story buildings on First Street across from the pier parking lot can't see the ocean either. They're looking at a parking lot. And there's not much we can do about it, but rooftop decks or bar seating on top of some of those buildings would enable people, like they can from Oku, when they can stop looking at a pile of rubble at 4th Avenue North, like people upstairs at Oku can see the ocean. It's really pretty neat. So any elevation that can be provided that people can get to is a good thing, and the 4 walkovers come to mind immediately. Also, a bar can't add seats without adding parking and getting permits, and it's very difficult to do, but still thinking about these one-story buildings, and there are 3 or 4 of them also on the boardwalk on the west side. And you stand in front of those buildings, you're looking at the back of a pile of chopped up palm trees and renourished sand dune. You're not seeing the ocean. Anything we could do, and I don't have the answer to this, to get some elevation up in the boardwalk itself might be helpful. There are a couple of spots where a little bit of elevation would let people, even if they just came up 3 or 4 feet over a period of a block, see the ocean. And then the next thing, and this is big, I've been involved with 3 oceanfront properties in the area, and in each case there's a 3-foot strip of land seaward of the bulkhead, which was ceded by the state of Florida to the owners of the upland property in the 70s. So we probably own 3 feet seaward of the bulkhead. That's landscapable, that's bench seatable, that's potentially even usable in short stretches to increase the width of the activation area, because that would increase the width of the fire zone. Again, you probably wouldn't want to hardscape everything, but there's chunks of it you could do a lot with. And Taylor, I don't know if our city attorney can look into this, but I'm 3 for 3 on getting the 3 feet in front of the bulkhead.
Okay.
2 times it wasn't passed on with the deeds because the local surveying company and the local title companies didn't realize that indeed it had to go back and get it.
Mm-hmm.
Which in one case involved getting a quit claim from a guy who was 2 weeks from being dead. But it is the property of the upland property, 3 feet seaward of the bulkhead. And 3 feet's 3 feet. But if we're talking about getting the most out of this thing, let's take a look at it. The other thing is the fencing around properties at the foot of 3rd Street. That basically takes out what would be the activation area. I noticed that the fence in front of what was the joint that's closed has just been rebuilt, brand new fence. Yeah, the fence in front of Salt is now a brand new fence. And the fence on the bar to the north of that is just falling down. It's awful. It'd be ugly. And I know we asked a couple of months ago what the legal situation was with people fencing off the boardwalk. In these two incidents in particular, and also the Castle Arena has about 6 feet of it too, if you look at the old concrete pattern. And if they have the right to be there, that's fine. But if they don't have the right to be there, somebody should at least consider what that means to activating that area, because that's a big break right in the middle of the area we're talking about, if both those fence lines are legitimate property of the businesses that are maintaining them. So that's kind of my things. Elevation, 3 feet, 4 old walkovers. And I'm talking about structural stuff that would help to bring forward any plans we want to talk about. You know, there's lots of else to talk about, but if we had 3 more feet, if we didn't maybe have one of those fenced in areas fenced in, if we had a little elevation in general, you know, those things might make it easier to activate the boardwalk over time. The last thing is that right away south of 1st Street, I think it should be mentioned somewhere. It's don't know how wide it is, but it's public accessible right away that's all grown over between 1st Street, 1st Avenue South, and Beach. And that's completely contiguous with the area we're talking about. We should at least note that it's there and potentially could be developed as part of the experience on the oceanfront.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'd like to just go back and address one item that you brought up, the first one about the walkovers. If I'm not mistaken, those walkovers are scheduled to be replaced. They're already in the budget for the CRA to fund those walkovers to be to be redone. There are other ones that the city is doing, but the CRA is doing those that are in that location, and I don't know what the schedule is right now. I know think they had it out for bids and are trying to work right now in getting a contractor on board to start that work later this year.
As you know, Gary, I live next to one, and people really use that elevation. We have people coming down to cocktail hour. I'm sure there's no alcohol in the glasses, of course, lining all the way up and down the high point to look out at the ocean. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they can't be any wider than they are, but they do make a really nice platform to look at the ocean.
Definitely.
And the 3 feet would be great, even if you just punched out in places to put in benches or a little bit of landscaping.
Comments from others?
Just a question that 3 feet, just to clarify your 3 feet, 3 feet from the eastern side of the boardwalk.
From the bulkhead line.
From the bulkhead line.
And if you look at the boardwalk, you see what looks like the bulkhead cap immediately east of it. Okay. And you'll notice the palm trees volunteering and growing just outside of that bulkhead cap. I believe that is the bulkhead, the original bulkhead cap. It was washed out pretty hard in Dora, and they put in a bunch of rocks, and then it's been renourished 3 times, I believe, at least. And the last one was a really pro job, terrific technique. A lot of development as opposed to just pumping shit up from right offshore and watching it wash right back out. Yeah. So I believe that's usable, and you might not want to use it all, but you might want to use pockets of it.
Any other comments? I think what we're looking for is trying to come up with some concepts of how to activate the boardwalk. And the information that was put forth by Taylor, I thought was well done, and really did establish, I thought, a well thought out phased approach. Because I don't know what's going to work on the boardwalk personally, and to me it almost seems like we need to take a stepped approach to it to see what's going to work out there and what isn't. so in favor of putting food trucks out there and things to that extent, but some of the other things that were mentioned in the documentation that we received, I thought was very appropriate to try to put something forward that put together a reasonable schedule for this, so that we had something happening rather than it extending out for a longer period of time. You know, we talked about the first phase being about 12 months, and then the second phase 12 to 18 months out, and then the final full implementation 18 plus months out. Okay. I didn't have it on.
Nope. And I'm supposed to be able to turn it on from up here, but it's not letting me. So we're good now.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry about that, everyone. We're still learning.
Apologize. So, anyways, I thought that the phased approach was an appropriate way to start, and somehow we need to ultimately dovetail that with what we plan on doing on First Street, because I don't think this is just the boardwalk alone. Plus, I think it also has an implication on Second Avenue North and Third Avenue North end zones, and we ought to take a look at that at the same time and make sure that, you know, whatever the plan is, and it may be that gets phased a little bit later, but we know where we want to go as we head down this road. Open for other.
Yeah, I think there's a couple comments. To Thad's point, I think having a clear definition of the area that we can activate and aligning on, I'll say the strategy, but I don't mean that word as intense as it sounds, but the strategy of how we are looking to incorporate the local businesses for outdoor seating, or, you know, to Thad's point, the fences or the footprint that they do have, I think will be important. I'm not entirely sure of the universe of the boardwalk that we are looking to activate. And I think some of that's come out in some of the earlier conversation that we just had, right? Which is, I think we just want to be really clear with what we're trying to activate, because that, in my opinion, will dictate strategy for activation. So I think a little more clarity there would be helpful. And I don't know, Taylor, is that a staff task,
I
or
mean,
is that us task?
yes and no. I mean, it's there's really only so many areas we can. So, like the chairman kind of pointed out, basically from where the lifeguard station is to essentially the pier, those are pretty much your parameters. Anything outside of that, it's just not feasible.
Okay, I think that's really helpful just to put that in, set that in stone, right? You know, I'm fully on board with the considering the other projects that are going on in this area. I think we have to. So First Street being one, Latham Plaza being another, the pier parking lot probably also fitting into the mix in some form or fashion. But that's just maybe an overarching statement. I also want, like, as we continue to define activation, you know, we're a fairly outdoor forward community. At the end of the day, I think that's what we're trying to achieve here, is the use of this outdoor space and fitting into our community, I guess what our community is looking to achieve, which is, you know, a beach community, an outdoor community. Things like considering things like children and or pets, I think, is an important nuance as we continue through this process. I don't know necessarily how we weave that into our overall activation strategy, but I do think those kind of bubbled up to the top for me as I was reviewing the documents that Taylor put together. You know, things like if we're going to have like water stations or shade. I think we brought up shade in previous conversations as well, but tailoring those to both the kid population, and then also animals, I think would be important. Like down to the tactical level, do we want to promote, dogs and pets on the boardwalk? Okay, I have an opinion of that answer, but I think that's probably on us to decide, right? So things like that kind of pop into my mind as well.
One thought back to the structural side of things, Taylor. Looking at the pier parking lot and some other areas, it seems that on First Street, the landscaping in front of the pier parking lot on First Street, it seems to me that could be incorporated into the pedestrian redo of First Street, giving you a much wider right-of-way to work with. You're looking at cars anyway, looking across 10 or 12 feet of landscaping at cars. You might want to do that in one spot. You might want to open that up into a wider right-of-way for whatever we're going to do on First Street. You pick up a lot of footage there and give yourself a lot more flexibility as regards to traffic lanes and pedestrian areas. Same situation on the boardwalk side of the pier parking lot. There's a huge, there's a very large landscape area over there, which could just as easily be part of the boardwalk for activation. That you'd pick up 10 feet there by taking away that. It's pretty grubby looking now. I'm sure it could be the landscape prettier, but it also could be part of the boardwalk. It's all public property, and you give yourself a whole lot more width there. Just looking at ways to maximize the space, and that would let you carry your activation north of the pier, all the way north up through the pier parking lot, because you pick up that much more space, a bunch more, a whole bunch more. So that's another thought on space to activate on top of. And took me 2 cruises to check that one out, because you can actually see where the concrete was cut at one point coming from the north where you start the pier parking lot. The concrete was cut to do that landscaping, I think. And the landscaping is a booger to maintain anyway.
Taylor, in the packet that you sent out, the boardwalk activation, is that this is what I'm understanding, is this the mission and vision statement in an essence, and this is by definition what it is that we then want the key activation strategies then therefore to follow along, correct?
I think that's a wonderful question, and I think that would be our goal, would be to take that activation page and then kind of use that. All the activation strategies that are listed in there are things that have come up, whether that be at our meetings, council briefings, retreats, workshops, you name it.
Okay.
So we really tried to base that definition off of real things that the council has set forth.
Okay.
But yes, I think that is a great foundation to build upon.
So, we need to worry about potential crossovers and space. I don't think the space matters until we have a distinct strategy and game plan for truly what it means for us to make that space what it is.
Yeah.
That's just, I look at it from like 30,000 foot view. If we don't know what we want it to kind of look like, what does it matter what we implement?
But at the same time, knowing how much potential space you have, like a big landscape description might help you with the 30,000 square foot vision.
Correct.
Wow, we've got all this more space.
And we may be able to, right, and we may be able to get more, or we may not. Those are still little nuances as we just kind of move along. So, as we talk about what it is that we're doing, we need activation strategies. Okay, what should we prioritize in regards to this space of activation? Is what comes to my mind right away. Do we want it specifically to focus in the initial phase, going back to the phase approach, pilot, expansion, full implementation, which I think is everything should always have a pilot phase. That's the way I think businesses operate and run. But from that standpoint then, which of these key points, the event programming, public art installation, dining, retail expansion, and recreational enhancements, need to be the key focus and almost like a pie chart out of them? Okay, which of these percentages does it need to be sectioned? So then as we go through the pie wheel in essence, then we then can determine how we want to balance community engagement or business interested into those different categories. And then from there, then we can then determine how can then boardwalk activation align with safety regulations. Because then we would have a framework of an allocation of then, okay, we have these businesses that are already here on the boardwalk, then how then do we want to implement and help them facilitate what it is that is this goal of events and programming, music? Do we want fitness classes out there? How much outdoor seating do we want available, or do we want more recreational enhancements to entice more active living? That's kind of my 2 cents on the matter right now.
Well, it becomes a little bit of a challenge in that, you know, we don't know exactly what's going to work out there. We haven't seen anything out on the boardwalk in quite some time. And the challenge becomes, how do we test it? How do we first help determine what the things are that we want out there? And, you know, I think it starts with us putting forth some concepts, working with the business community then in finalizing those concepts and then trying to implement them. You know, part of it is, you know, what vendors are going to be interested in even coming out there. Is there enough foot traffic out there to do things? Or is it more something that happens during more festival type functions rather than on a daily basis that we have activation out on the boardwalk? I think we just need to come up with some kind of a basic action plan that gets us started, and then we test it. And once we've tested it, we can then go back and I think take a better look at what the vision might be, and then implement it even further. And that's just, you know, my initial reaction. That's I guess why I zeroed in on what Taylor had presented to us in the way of a.
So then the question then that I have back is this. Is it our job to facilitate the needs of the community, and then the community's job to help support the businesses locally, and then the tourist then enhances those things?
Mm-hmm.
So what is it that we want for the community as a whole first? And what is it that we believe that, I'm sure we have enough data points over the years and different surveys to kind of tell us already what those things kind of are.
Unless I misread something, we've got a $9 million amount in the budget to address First Street and related issues in the next 5 years. Is that about right, Taylor?
Yes, those are very early preliminary. But if I may, Mr. Chairman, there's been several kind of comments and things that I came up just kind of want to comprehensively address. We keep something that as staff, you know, kind of just hearing, and that's maybe not concerning, but just like a little red flag is First Street and the boardwalk. And maybe it's on us for putting them on the same agenda and timing them at the same time. And while there needs to be obviously a connectivity, a cohesiveness, and a relationship between the two, it needs to be a very distant relationship from this aspect. You know, the usage of First Street is a completely 180-degree opposite use of the boardwalk. And I'm worried from what I'm hearing that we're starting to kind of muddy the waters between the two. And what I don't want to see happen is we kind of keep replaying this First Street conversation and how is First Street going to implement what we do out here when the boardwalk is not, it's not even a capital project. We're not talking capital. We're not talking ripping out the boardwalk and rebuilding it. We're talking about programming, while First Street is capital. So we're talking about two very distinctly opposite projects, and I really want to make sure that's abundantly clear because I'm worried we'll kind of continue down this road and then we'll be 6 months, a year from now, and we'll still have done nothing because we're waiting on the capital project. Whereas the programming aspect of things, that can be almost instantaneous. It's very easy to develop programming, and easy being a very relative term. Let me be clear. It takes work, but it's far simpler than a massive, to Thad's point, $9 million capital project. So I really want to make sure we're being very distinct between the two. Yes, they need to be related. They need to be cousins. They don't need to be like twins, if that makes sense. The second thing, you know, we kind of threw a bunch of content at you guys for this and a lot of information. I think probably the best thing for today's conversation and moving forward and kind of where we need to be as staff to really start kind of driving this thing forward is if you're looking at the section on the examples to phased approach, if we just look at that little chunk in phase one, and that is where we make our decisions from today, and then the phase one temporary and semi-permanent boardwalk uses, if we look at kind of both of those phase ones today and we go, okay, these are what we like, these are what we don't like. We don't want to see food trucks. We do want to see live performances. We don't want to see whatever, and we do want to see yoga. And we can kind of take those concepts and then run with that. That gets us into that 0 to 12 month chunk of this. Once we roll into that next 12 to 18 month part of this, then it'll be time to really start bringing up more of those First Street conversations as far as the capital side of things. But again, the boardwalk, programming, First Street, capital.
Are you saying there's nothing in the budget to do any improvements to the existing infrastructure on the boardwalk side? Wow.
No.
We're just trying to facilitate traffic.
Yeah, well,
We're trying to make it more attractive.
This was never intended to be a capital project. It wasn't. That's not the intent of the boardwalk.
well, if we can't pick up the footage on the edge of the parking lot on the boardwalk side, maybe we can pick it up on the First Street side. Whatever, but we need to know that these things do exist as we go forward and think about the longer term use of this, because if it's not wide enough to do some of the things we'd like to do, maybe we can come up with a little bit capital money down the line and make it a little wider. And there's some severe restraints where these fences exist. If we go with the fire marshal, it leaves you pretty chopped up. It leaves really just the area right down by the lifeguard station, a couple of blocks to the north, pretty much wide open. Because once you get up to 3rd Street, you start having areas that you could not utilize in any regard for public use. Thank you.
Taylor, I appreciate your comments. I know I was the one who made the comments about making this holistic and looking at First Street and Boardwalk and so forth. It was more, my comment was meant more from a vision standpoint, that we make sure that it's cohesive from that standpoint. I think you're right. You've got to look at the two pieces differently, because one is more a capital project than the other one, which is more a program type of thing. So,
yeah.
But I think that, even the boardwalk may take some capital improvements. I don't know that we're going to get away from it completely, because just looking at what is existing out there, we've got issues with the pavement and things out there that are going to need to be replaced. That's already broken up. And there are trip hazards and things like that are out there that are going to have to be taken care of if we truly want to make it a walkable area. But
and that's
again,
more of a
minor.
maintenance.
That's minor
Yeah,
in comparison.
which again is a completely different thing than ripping out an entire street segment. For the purposes, though, of today's conversation, and again, being able to move this forward and kind of feather in the cap, check the box, we're good to go. We need to decide phase one, 0 to 12 months, programming aspect. Obviously, if there's cracked pavers and tripping hazards, that falls into a maintenance. We have money budgeted every year for that. So that's nothing we need to do anything crazy for. What programming in the next 0 to 12 months would we like to see?
Let us go back and, get feedback on, do we do a phased approach, or do we just jump into this with all feet? I mean, how does the board or the agency feel about that? Phased.
Yeah, I would say phased.
And I love the phased approach, and Taylor, the way that you broke it down, I think it totally makes sense. And I think there's also an opportunity in this initial pilot phase to experiment with tight feedback loops for, deploying an activation, and then, okay, what do the businesses and community think about it, and then pivoting accordingly. I feel like this framework sets us up to test a lot of stuff and get validation. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just like we did with the outdoor dining, that was a 2-year pilot program, and we did it. It was these 2 businesses here. It was successful, so we extended the program, but it gave us an opportunity to spend 2 years, really look at it. If we were to have a ton of 911 calls and a bunch of calls for service, and this is creating horrible, flow of traffic, whatever, obviously we were going to then reevaluate that. Fortunately, we did not run into that. The pilot program was successful, so we expanded it. And I think that we're kind of trying to, from our perspective, look at structuring this very similarly, where we're in a pilot phase, what works and what doesn't. And for the business owners, they may think something is a great idea, like, sure, bring in a yoga or a ice cream truck, whatever it may be. And then that may happen for a few months, and they may go, okay, whoa, this is not what we thought, and this is not working. It gives us flexibility then to kind of pull in the reins and pivot a little bit before implementing this entire permanent program.
And one thing that's really nice too about this being like temporary and pop-up activations is that it's not a one-way door for anything that we implement. Like we can walk it back if it's not a hit. So.
Marcus.
So I would say we start with choosing 3 or 4 of the restaurants for outdoor seating and tap into seeing what they would do for a pilot program for that. So we just choose specific. We don't open it up to everyone. And then as just a way just to get it kind of started. And then definitely we want to create a draw. So therefore there's more people coming down to these restaurants and these different shops. So therefore then maybe to enhance bike rentals or beach rentals of sorts. Therefore, specific market classes in essence. I don't know. I don't even know what that. I don't like arts markets and those types of things, but a lot of people do. I've been to the Riverside Market. I don't mind it. I'll go to the AB one and buy eggs.
So wait, to that point, I kind of feel like we're trying to eat the elephant, right? How do I want to say this? You look at the AB market, you look at the smaller little farmers market that happens. That's second off Penman, and there's one at Jarbo. Could we, or why couldn't we, just recreate that model for this pilot phase? Keep it super simple. Do an outdoors market type of setting. Pick a few weekends that work for the surrounding area. Not overlap them with other festivals and events, things like that. Just to gauge interest, try something that's fairly repeatable. I use that in air quotes to Taylor's point. Nothing's ever that simple. I don't think we need to get too into the weeds on the what necessarily, but let's maybe align on should we set 3 weekends of like some version of a boardwalk farmers market or something along those lines. Distill down the list of types of vendors that we would accept into that setting and gauge interest. I mean, that seems like a pretty simple way to activate and get real-time feedback on this strategy. I don't know, thoughts from the rest of the board?
I like it.
I would just ask that I think we need to go back and take a look at where we place these, because your comment about you would take certain restaurants and allow them to put seating out onto the boardwalk, as if I understood it correctly. The question is, where does that occur? Where does the pop-up vendors occur on the boardwalk, particularly if those spaces are cordoned off with fences and things to that extent, which we have some existing examples of. We need to just kind of figure out exactly how we need to do that.
Yeah, and real quick, sorry, in my mind, we don't even touch outdoor seating until we have some version of does this work or does it not, right? So let me say that differently. We hold 3, I'm using the number 3 just for a number. We hold 3 pilot I'm going to call them farmers markets again, for lack of a better term, some market, right, events. And we don't even necessarily touch the outdoor seating portion of that. We just let the events naturally occur and we see what works and what doesn't. I think the outdoor seating and the local businesses are an important piece of this puzzle. I don't want my comments to imply otherwise, but I think that approach gives us some actionable data. Big data guy, gives us some data to actually define what success looks like here for the community, for the local business owners, and for our board, right? So,
If I understood the plan correctly, it's staff looking for input from us, but then ultimately taking that before we even implement anything, taking it to the business community and getting some feedback from the business community also. And I think if we do that and then come back and re-examine that one more time before implementation, I think, I think we hopefully will have a better perspective on what's going to work out there. But I think I understand your comments, Kevin, and I agree.
yeah, I think we're aligned. I wasn't implying that we should carve out the business community feedback by any means. I just think we can find the balance between a piloted approach with their upfront feedback and then kind of open up the rest of the longer term plan as it develops.
Yeah. I think the challenge for staff is going to be how do you determine who the vendors are? Who are you going to allow in and who aren't you?
Yeah, I think that's relatively easy. We've got a model for that already with Parks and Rec, with things that are city-sponsored events. So as long as they're a registered vendor, they have the proper insurance, they have the appropriate licensure, if you will, that they have to be a vendor at any city-sponsored festivals. I think that's a pretty, in this scope of things, it's probably one of the easier things, just because Parks and Recreation already has that model for their events in place. So we can just steal that from them.
I was just going to add that while I personally like looking at all these ideas, I want to throw spaghetti at the wall and test them all just to see what works. But I guess, some of the things Kevin said made me think like we don't want to muddy the waters in terms of what we want to test. Like if, we put a farmer's market and a yoga class and like some public art and there are tons of people there, we like don't know what it was that moved the needle. So
good point. Marcus.
So, like when we do the movie, we could set up the boundaries appropriately for outdoor seating. Maybe on the boardwalk as a pilot program for those specific restaurants. When we do different venues that wouldn't require, and therefore then it would show more specificity to what it is to the pilot program and how that actually produced an outcome, because it would be specific to an event.
I'm not sure I fully understood because we already do movies.
I know, I'm saying when we do the movies, now we add outdoor seating available into the boardwalk for those specific businesses.
The way that's set up, though, you're really sitting in Latham Plaza or the.
I'm saying afterwards, beforehand. Yeah, I'm not saying like during the movie that people are going to be at the thing. I'm saying like before or after to give people an opportunity, if they want to go down there ahead of time, eat, that they can be on the boardwalk, eat, and then go to the movie. Or after the movie, they could go down the boardwalk, sit outside.
Okay.
And then that way, to help expand, if the weather's really nice, most people would prefer to be outdoors than to be inside.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, as of now, the only thing I personally love the idea of more outdoor dining. It's been extremely successful right here. But as it presently exists within the parameters of the footprint where we can have it, there's actually no restaurants that could utilize it. I know. I just totally rained on the parade. I know. I was that person.
Let's scratch it.
I know. That was, listen, I've been toying with bringing that up or not. But while it's a beautiful idea, until we see maybe redevelopment happening on some of those parcels that are connected to the boardwalk, right now nobody is eligible.
Well, Salt does have a brand new fence around what was previously a dining area. Is the fence there for a reason, or is it going to be a restaurant?
It's a restaurant.
Okay, so there is one restaurant there, not none. Okay.
And so to be fair, when I said it, they wouldn't be eligible. They already as a part of their footprint already from a previously kind of grandfathered in situation. They have that footprint already, so they don't need any special permissions, and they can't encroach any further than they already are.
Then I would just focus on events.
Mm-hmm.
And let's just focus on what are those workshops or those event programs that we want to do to then enhance that area.
Right.
Taylor, do you think you have enough information that you could move
No,
forward? Or,
I'm
no?
just kidding.
No, that's all right. That's fine.
No, I mean, I think this is going to be one of those topics that there's going to be things we can do in the immediate. I like this idea of a market, whether it be a Saturday or a Sunday. We'll need to obviously, I think, out of respect for the existing markets, get with the Parks and Rec department and the events department, because we do already have the Penman market, and that's Saturday. That's the Saturday situation. We have a ton of events coming up, so I can get with them on the calendar and kind of see what would be appropriate and what would make sense. I think that's a relatively, again, low-hanging fruit because they already have a model for hosting those type of events anyway. I think as we are behind the scenes kind of pushing that along, we take that to the businesses. We let council know, hey, this is kind of the first step of this, is testing these waters, to your point, not muddying the waters and having 6 things happening over the course of 3 days, and then something goes wrong and we can't pinpoint it. And then I think after that, maybe what I would like to see in a couple of months is, I've been to a lot of CRA communities where they have extremely successful boardwalks, programs, things that are similar to this. And maybe instead of bringing such a big, broad approach, I bring some very specific, hey, this really works well in this community in a similar footprint. What do we think? And maybe we start bringing back more specific ideas and kind of start funneling in on these topics. If everyone is, of course, comfortable with that. So if you guys have consensus for us to start the necessary preparations for creating some type of weekend market, see what the council thinks of that, see what the business community thinks of that, kind of get that model in place. And then once we kind of get that kicked off, start looking to other communities and bring back more specific activities for the boardwalk to you guys.
I think it would be helpful also to get the input from the, obviously, business community,
Yeah.
and see how all of that meshes together and so forth. But I think that's, to me, the approach that we need to take right now. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts on that, but if not, I think I'd like to move the conversation on to First Street, which is really somewhat similar.
Just
Go ahead.
really quickly, the point, Taylor, you made about referencing like other CRAs and kind of what's worked for them. I really like that approach in just like connecting with our like sister CRAs sort of and seeing what worked for them. And so I think in general as an approach for us in making decisions, like looking at precedents will keep us from reinventing the wheel each time. So.
I can tell you behind the scenes, we have an event that another CRA community did when I was, that we will bring to you very soon. We're working a little bit with parks to find a good weekend, but if we allow for tent market vendor type things as part of this first phase, I think that makes a tentative event we would like to see happen a whole lot easier. That came from another community that had a lot of success with it, so I think that'll work well.
I did a little bit of research into that, and the boardwalks that I looked at probably don't fit the scale of what we're talking about here, but most of them have a success factor that includes a lot of different activities and things. You go to Santa Monica and it's the Pier blends traditional boardwalk nostalgia with modern attractions appealing to a wide range demographic. I mean, I think we've got to find a way to tailor it to this community, not so much for what is, much bigger and broader, but I didn't find any good ones that kind of related specifically to what we have here, but it was interesting to see what did work and didn't work in some of the communities that I quickly took a look at. But I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
We have a unique landscape to work with too, specific to our locations.
Yep. Any other comments on the boardwalk? Taylor, do you have any questions for us that you want to get answered on the boardwalk?
At this time, I do not. I've got enough that we can kind of get started on some things and bring you guys some updates in the near future.
Okay.
Just one more thing. I realize we're not talking about a capital project, but if we could at least do some landscaping in that 3 feet, if we do own it, it might make it more attractive looking out rather than looking at chopped back, hacked back volunteer palms sitting right at the bulkhead line. It's pretty ugly. Anything we can do to improve the visual depth and perspective, I think would make it a better experience for all these activities we're talking about. So,
That I totally agree with you. I mean, walking along there, there's a lot of debris in there. There's old construction debris, along there that just needs to get cleaned up and make it much more attractive. But with that, why don't we move into First Street? Do you want to lead us off on this on First Street,
Sure.
Taylor?
Yep. So this is, I'm going to be very blunt about this. This is going to be a little bit of a beast of a project to tackle for a number of reasons. One of the biggest reasons being this project was not something that has been on the radar in this capacity since I've been here. I mean, there's been elements of this. There's been elements of expanding certain sections, but redoing First Street as a complete overhaul, that is new. And we are currently in the CIP. We are looking at the capital improvement plan from fiscal year 26 all the way through fiscal year 2030. And there is not even room in the budget to even consider doing an overhaul until the earliest would be fiscal year 27. And that does not come without council having to prioritize and make sacrifices. So I want to just start with that, make that abundantly, clear. This is a big priority. But if this is going to get bumped up anytime sooner than fiscal year 27, then there are going to have to be some substantial projects cut from the roster in future fiscal years. And that is spread across right now 3 fiscal years. But until we know the true magnitude of what the agency thinks and then what city council thinks as far as what plans they want to see taken with this project, it's very hard to budget. That $9 million was a really nice middle of the road. If it's a very small scale project, it could be less. If it's larger than that, it'd be double that. So I want to make that clear. 2 big things: no pavers. Nobody seems to have any desire for pavering. Decorative concrete treatments, great. They look nice, but they're far easier to maintain. When we do this with pavers, you get into a situation we're in right now where a row or 2 gets significantly damaged, you will never replace them to match again. And then every time you have to replace one, you end up with a lovely mosaic pattern of pavers because the sun fades them all at different speeds. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the number 1 priority with this is pedestrian safety. Right now it's a little bit confusing and there are not a whole lot of delineators between the street and where you're supposed to be walking. So that's kind of what led us to this point. We have reached out to the TPO about getting a traffic study from them. They have not yet confirmed that, but the TPO would do that traffic study for free of charge, which is huge, being as, again, we're looking at FY27 before we can start allocating funds to this. So being able to get a transportation study from TPO would be huge. So what we would want to see as part of that traffic study would be looking at 1- and 2-way options. Again, everybody has thoughts and opinions on that, but we really want to see the data on what makes the most sense and what is the best use of the road. We were looking at different things, the crosswalks. If we're getting away from pavers, we still need to have really good indication that, hey, this is where you cross the street. And then looking at speed limits and traffic calming. I'm not saying any of these are going to be what come from that, but these are all things to take into consideration. And then looking at those aesthetic enhancements. So gathering spaces, sidewalks, landscaping, street furniture, pocket plazas, and these parklets. That's something I've actually seen in a lot of communities recently facing similar situations like this. Sorry, there's a lag on the screen. And this is just touching on, again, those aesthetic ideas. This is not necessarily, I am not a traffic engineer, so I cannot say whether 1- or 2-way makes the most sense. I can say if something is pretty or not, and that's what this is all about. So this is raised planter beds. Those serve as buffers between pedestrians and the street. So again, it doesn't have to be anything crazy. If you look all the way to this far right-hand side, they can be very simple, but They can be made of very strong concrete that have rebar in them. So if a car unfortunately were to look down texting and swerve a little bit off the road, you hit concrete with rebar, you're not going to go plowing into the glass storefront of somebody's business. Also a great example, and I tried to add it in here and I obviously did not save it, is our friends right here on the corner at Jekyll and Oaxaca. As part of their outdoor dining component, originally they didn't really want the aesthetic of having this big fenced in barrier. So again, they used very, very, very heavy concrete planters to delineate from the street into their seating, and it has worked beautifully. Parklets with seating barriers, these are kind of, I've seen them in a lot of places. They're not that common where we are. I was in Tampa not long ago, and they have several of these. Again, kind of a similar concept. Obviously, you want to make sure it's done safely, but on a street like First Street, where you're going to have much slower speed limits, we're not talking A1A. You've got these little areas where you have these little bump outs, and maybe you have a bench or a little seating area. It can be creative. It's just aesthetically pleasing, and you can use that to then break up sidewalk from roadway. Again, none of these aren't any new ideas. These are things done all over, but these are things we want some direction on. So, is there a preference from the agency on having these additional seating areas or these planter areas, or what other ideas have you seen in other communities? And then kind of what is your vision for the long term of First Street?
I just want to add that City Council met last week and in a workshop session and spent the day trying to develop their top 6 strategic priorities for the city. And the number one item that they have is identify and develop the action plan for revitalizing the downtown area. That is top on their list of priorities. So, this becomes really important. First Street, obviously Boardwalk kind of falls into that, but more so First Street, to try to figure out how we revitalize the downtown area. I'll open it up for conversation and discussion. Yeah.
Agree completely. Until we decide if we're going to go one way or two way, I think it's going to be rather difficult to do any design work at all. But I think that perhaps using that strip along the pier parking lot as part of the total right-of-way would give us some more flexibility for parklets and bump outs and seats and little places to turn around. The other thing is at 3rd Street and also up into 2nd Street, many of the businesses have covered over much of the walkway and with columns and arches. And again, that's space that I believe is public space, and I don't know, Taylor, if all of them have the right to do what has been done over time. Some of it's very old and some of it's rather more recent.
A lot of them do have permission from previous revocable encroachment agreements. We do a monthly write around with the city manager and look at various things, and those have kind of been a hot topic before. And the majority of the ones that we see, unfortunately, years and years ago, were granted permission to do what they've done.
Well, I'm not saying I'm necessarily against it, but we need to know what's ours and what's theirs, and because that's a whole lot of turf in the area we're talking about, and it's a whole lot of turf in the street ends we're talking about at 1st and 3rd. So we just need to know. But until we decide one way or two way, I think it's hard to get down into the details. But Taylor's entirely correct. Sturdier is better, and we all agree we need to protect pedestrians, and we all agree that we need to clarify what is or isn't the street or a walkway. It's very confusing. And I think we all agree that Chief Smith can give us a lot of input as we get into tightening this thing up. He may also have some thoughts on one way and two way. I don't know. But until we decide one way or two way, it's going to be hard to really tighten up very much, because one way would give us a lot more area to work with.
I'm all for a one way.
Yeah, me too, but it's not our decision.
Well, I understand that, but if we can help kind of direct or show the blessing and the benefits rather than enhancing the area to make it more attractive for us to come down and hang out.
Be hugely much more pedestrian space
It would,
and more ability to do things with that space.
with that space to attract, to create events, to
Or-
enhance business
or allow
opportunities.
the adjacent business owners to use some of that space that a one-way would make more available.
Yes.
Totally with you on that.
And I think it's easier for traffic.
And again, when we were in the workshop with the city council, I mean, obviously, everybody felt that it should be able to be closed off pedestrian-wise for events. But as we talked about at that time, because the hotels, the traffic going in and out of the businesses, be kind of hard to make it pedestrian only all the time, because you don't have a street on the backside of the oceanfront ones that you could use to reverse their traffic flow like you do in some of the other areas that we've looked at. So I'm for one way, and I'm for closing for special events in coordination with the hotels and the merchants there. And I'm for, once we decide which one or two ways we're going, hunkering down on getting this design and maybe gobbling up that right of way along the Pure parking lot.
Yeah.
Suck it into the program. Thank you.
I like all those different kinds of seating environments. Anything that you can help create, I think, more of a environment for a family to come and hang. I grew up in Portland, so we had tons of areas all throughout the boardwalk. Portland, Oregon, that is. It's a little different nowadays, but
Well, once upon a time, the seating areas that we had on the boardwalk and some on First Street turned into very unattractive features because they were permanently occupied by folks who didn't have anywhere else to go.
but
And the boardwalk ones, people would stand up and watch for cops to come so they could signal their buddies to stop breaking into cars.
yeah.
I mean, and that's what Chief Smith alluded to, and we touched on that earlier in the meeting.
But-
So, his input's huge.
Yeah, but the more people we have down there, the less likely they want to stay. We've seen that specifically
Outnumber 'em.
at Gonzalez Park, though, because that's right in my neighborhood. It's two blocks away from me, or three. But that place is cleaned out like crazy, and that place is consistently active. And it's a great park. And so, from my standpoint, is the more people we can get down there, the less likely that there will be that kind of environment that they would want to stay.
Absolutely. Taylor, when do you think you could get the TPO to help us, or where are we at on that? 'Cause I think that's pretty
Well,
important.
our friends at the Southern Group, one of them has a meeting there tomorrow.
Great.
So we're going to keep kind of diving into this. And I'm glad you brought that up, because as I was sitting here kind of listening, I was realizing I kind of did you guys a disservice. I probably should have expanded more on that. And truly and realistically, we were very hopeful we would have had some more direction by this meeting. We just don't. And unfortunately, that's just the reality of the situation when you're hoping an organization will provide you a free traffic study. With that being said, there's not a whole lot of action that we can expect you guys to be able to give us until we have that study at least engaged and in plan. So we wanted to present this to you and just kind of, these are some of the ideas. This is kind of what we're thinking, but truly until we have an appropriate traffic study where we can then have concrete data and say, okay, this makes sense to do it one way, two way here, whatever that may be, it's really hard to give true direction because I don't know. I'm not a transportation engineer. I think I know what would work out there, but the numbers may show something completely different. And until we have those, it's just really, really hard to go too terribly far with this. And kind of on the flip side of that, I don't want you guys to dive too terribly far into it, because if the numbers show something completely different than what we're assuming, then we've wasted all this time and effort on planning for something that wasn't realistic.
Totally there. I mean, between Chief Smith's opinion on one-way, two-way, and the TPO's opinion on one-way, two-way, we'll be well informed. I think most of us think one-way would be great, just because it would give us so much more potential pedestrian area. But we're not traffic guys either. So,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, on the topic specific to like raised beds versus parklets, in general, I think it would kind of almost regardless of one way or two way. I like, and it could just be the pictures that you chose, Taylor. But
Listen, I tried to find the best.
yeah, a little bit of bias in there. Okay, yeah. The comment I'll make specific to the future state of First Street is I really liked the idea of raised planar beds and a solid like concrete barrier, because I think it provides more opportunity for landscaping and shade.
Yeah.
It just looks like your top set of pictures that you have pulled up here. Just I'd rather walk down those streets than the parklet in full sun benches.
Sure.
So that's just, I guess, general direction from my perspective.
Yeah.
I like that raised planter idea a little bit better.
As long as we put in stuff that's salt tolerant, wind tolerant, as long
Agreed.
as somebody cleans the cigarette butts out of the raised beds, it's a great plan.
Agreed.
That hasn't historically always been the case.
Agreed. Yeah, I think my comment is more vegetation is probably better than less. Just
Okay.
I think it provides a more inviting and enjoyable experience for all.
Yeah,
Okay.
I totally agree, and I think the raised planter beds. I think there's also a lot you can do within that, and then so maybe a controversial opinion, but I've lived places with the parklets, and I feel like they can, when they're done really well, amazing.
Yeah.
When they're not, they become nice little tents and camps for the types of characters we're looking to avoid. So
Valid point.
yeah, it's just like if we were to do that, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, just like make sure they're made really well, and yeah, somehow do not encourage that type of.
It's a great point.
Exactly, yeah, and so I feel like we don't want to make a nice place. Yeah, you guys.
Absolutely.
Taylor, in looking at this a little bit further, I just had some questions as to what area, again, we're kind of talking about, because the paver area starts roughly at Latham Plaza, and then it goes north to Fifth Avenue North, and it stops there. But then the intersection of 6th Avenue North still has some pavers in it, but there's asphalt between 5th and 6th. So the question to me just is, what is the total length that we're really looking at? Are we?
I think honestly, at least for the traffic study, I would say Beach to 6th, which is almost the district, at least the business core of the downtown district.
I'm sorry, you said 6th Avenue North.
Basically Beach to 6 North.
To 6 North.
And I would.
Again, because of the street width and the way it works is different as when you come off of Beach onto First, heading north, it's asphalt and it's a wider street. It has parking on one side of the street. But then as you start to get north of First Avenue North, that's where it starts to wind a little bit, and it becomes a little bit of a challenge going through there, particularly if there's trucks coming. I mean, I've had some real challenges, trying to avoid the bigger trucks that come through there. With those thoughts, I kind of zeroed in on concept B that was part of the urban trails study as being what I thought would be most appropriate for the downtown area. It's a one-way street. I don't know whether it's one-way north or south, but it's a one-way street. It allows a little bit of the curvature of the street, which is what's happening now. But since it's one way, I think it'd be easier I don't have to deal with the trucks that are coming in the opposite direction that you're going. It allows access into the businesses that need access. So that's kind of the direction I was going. I understand we still have the traffic study to do, but this seemed like it fit better. It allowed for things to happen, such as what you're describing on the screen up there, along with the potential of putting in some bicycle lanes down through that area. We lose the bicycle lane from basically 6th Avenue North down to Beach. There is no bicycle lane there. It suddenly disappears. And so
It was
I
always
think
planned as a shared road through the downtown,
it's
but
but it's not defined as that. I mean, if you go down the street, it's not defined as such. And so, I think we need this council a couple of years back did a resolution supporting the East Coast bike path, and that runs down First Street, and we ought to celebrate that, and we ought to, you know, make that a known element of our downtown development as part of, you know, the overall East Coast Greenway.
Gary, how about putting up a sign that says this road is a bike path? Also, is by special permission only. As conservation of the path, cycle shops. The whole road was
Yeah.
intended to be a bike path.
Yeah, but it's not identified as such. I mean, there's no signage. There's
Yeah, there's just a few signs
Yeah.
that say shared
it could
road.
it could be.
They're still there. There's a couple signs that say sharing the road and everybody's.
I will
Yeah,
say
there's a yeah.
the positive, at least that I'm hearing, and please somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but at least I'm hearing basically from everybody in attendance that the one way seems like a really good idea, and it seems like if the transportation traffic study shows that that is a good option and that it works for our traffic counts and flow, that the agency would be very supportive of proceeding with that pending the results of a traffic study. That's kind of what I'm gathering, which is pretty much what we needed to look for, because I also want to communicate that to the TPO that the agency is very supportive of seeing this become one way for a certain portion and seeing kind of how we can work with that. So, yep.
I think that's what you were hearing this afternoon.
I like that. That's like, that never happens at
Yeah.
every single person.
And you know, again, I'm in favor of simplifying all of the pavers down there. I mean, to me, it's the streets falling apart right now. There's a lot of issues with the pavers, and
There's been consensus, at least from staff and administration, to do away with pavers altogether. Maybe a very minimal decorative sections, but even that, they're like, please, no more pavers. There's other ways to make decorative sections. You can do decorative concrete.
I mean, Public Works can't keep up with the work that needs to be done down there. They don't have the labor to do paver work, and so you know, it's simpler just to put some asphalt down, and if you need to cut it up for getting
Sure.
to a sewer or something, it's a lot easier than with the
It's just
paver.
much easier maintenance. Like I said earlier, when you have pavers, it doesn't matter. Even if you had all the crews in the world to replace sections, it's never going to match up without having to completely replace the entire chunk.
And I would just refer you back. I think Heather was there with me when we went down to Fort Myers for the FRA meeting down there, and their streets were paved streets along with the sidewalks being pavers, and it had a nice feel to it. It was simplified, but it was clean, and it had some nice defined seating areas for restaurants and things to that extent. Wonderful little secluded courtyards and so forth, where restaurants shared that space and made it interesting to be outside sitting and eating your dinner and things. But
It is a gorgeous area, absolutely.
yeah.
With a pretty forest garage, all the courtyards right down to the ground. Just
Any other comments on First Street at this point? Taylor, do you need anything else from us?
I think I'm good on First Street. Like I said, a lot of that I know is kind of pending on us waiting on that transportation study. But at least we have consensus for what you guys think would be the best option, and then we'll get the results of that and see where we go from there.
Okay. Anybody else? Anything else you want us to touch on this afternoon?
I do just want to add, on your way out, I'm going to set up several papers up here. They'll set up little stacks of things I printed out. They're all different. Just take one of each on your way out. And like I said, 4 of these are things on that House and Senate bill, and then 1 is a summary and the takeaways from that council retreat that the chairman referenced. It is not all of everything that was referenced. It is just specifically the takeaways that affect the agency. I'll set all these out up here for you guys to grab one.
There was one last item that you had, which was about future workshop topics.
Yes.
Do any of the agency members have some specific topics that you would want us to address in the coming weeks, months?
I don't know if it was last session or the one before, but I know we had talked about kind of getting back together and revisiting the facade program, I would say as a whole, and just aligning on intent moving forward.
We were going to make some tweaks to the program and so forth, and I think that was just something you were going to come back to
Yep.
us with, right?
But I do think that revisiting the program, kind of reopening that now that we've had it in place for a couple of years,
Yeah.
I think that's great, especially as we're heading into fiscal year 26 and we start bringing budget things to you guys in late summer. I tentatively actually had that one down for a May-ish timeframe workshop, just so it could give us a little bit of time to kind of
Perfect.
make some recommendations. And then I also had the chairman was at the retreat last Friday. One of the things I would like to discuss potentially at the April workshop is a program that we've been working on kind of behind the scenes, which we're calling basically the Beach Alliance. It's basically a downtown business alliance, and it's essentially additional eyes and ears on the ground in the downtown district. But that's something that we would like to bring to you guys at the next workshop to kind of start looking to get that into place.
One item I'd like to have in the way of a conversation in the near future is just backtrack a little bit on, and this is new to probably most of the board members, but at one point we had talked about maintenance in the downtown and the need for possibly a handyman or something along those lines, or hiring a company to come in and help us in maintaining the downtown. I'd like to go back. I'm not sure that we ever brought that to any kind of resolution. I would like to have that conversation and see how the board feels about what we need to do to maintain the downtown and with a better appearance. The term that had been used before is we wanted it to be Disney-esque like is what we want. So that'll kind of set the tone for you.
So a little backstory there. There was some resolution. What it came down to at that time is administration. The way our positions work, I work for the city, therefore I'm a city employee, i.e. I have city benefits, I am a city staff. There was no desire at that time to add additional personnel under this hat. And so what we did end up doing and have done is the contract that Parks and Recreation has with their maintenance crews in the downtown, we elevated the frequency and the amount of times, the amount of employees that were allocated out of that line item, and that budget increased last fiscal year for maintenance in the downtown. So we did do that.
But also we've been doing the drive arounds
Mm-hmm.
with the city manager to identify, because a lot of things were identified were the responsibility of Public Works or Beaches Energy or a utility company.
Right. They weren't something a random handyman could do anyway.
We could really do anything with. So, I mean, I literally spent 2 hours twice in the car with the city manager driving around, looking for things, jotting down notes. We have a spreadsheet of what it is, a picture, who's responsible, what's the status, because it's not just one entity that can fix them all or address them all.
Right.
And so, coming from the city manager's office down to the different departments and their maintenance teams, and trying to get them, and it was all little stuff, like there's graffiti on this transformer box. There's these white or yellow bollards that are rusted and falling apart. So a lot of things got fixed in that little 2-week period after we sent out that list.
And then more graffiti appeared.
You're doing a
More of it came back.
You still can't get rid of the mailbox over in front of them.
Don't bring that up to the city manager.
Well, and part of the concern.
I know, and we can't get them to tell us if they use it, if they can get it, if they can fix it. I'm like, I'm just gonna unbolt it from the ground and drop it off at post office one of these days. So we're doing that in a little bit different way than was kind of requested, but it's being done, and we're going out on the weekend.
Well, if we could just sit down and talk about that a little bit, because the other concern I have is, I know we're working on the design for Latham Plaza, but if you go out there right now, Latham Plaza is a disaster. It looks terrible when you just go down First Street and look on either side, and there's no grass. It's gone. The bollards are in terrible shape. And some of them have a cone or whatever sitting over the top of them because it's broken off and it's missing. The area in front of the pavilion is it was flooded the other day, and then
They're replacing those grates in front of the pavilion.
and there's missing grates there that somebody's going to trip and fall on and things like that. It's just
those are being replaced. So those are the things that, like, they're continually getting done. It's just getting it, recognizing the problem.
And if I may add, when you see these things, like, I'm one person. I mean, and we've got, but I can't, I'm not realistically standing in every corner of downtown every single day, all day long. When you see things, email me, call me, text me. If you're not letting me know and you're waiting until a meeting, how are we supposed to fix that? Please, I can't reiterate that enough. Let us know when you see an issue, please. That's one of the whole driving forces behind this business alliance too, as additional eyes and ears. Like, hey, I may not be in front of Tavern every day, but if they've got something that's damaged or broken or it's a hazard, they certainly are. And having this avenue where then they communicate that to us, it's going to help to elevate things downtown kind of across the board. It's not a one person thing. It's going to take effort from the board, from council, from staff, from businesses. It's going to take a little bit of everybody.
And I agree, and I've been doing some of that. It's just that I don't know that that's what you're doing. It would just be good to get some.
That's exactly what we're doing. We literally drove every street,
Yeah.
stopped, and really things.
But if we got some feedback, at least understood that that's what you were, how you were addressing the issue, it would be helpful.
That is how we're addressing it. I mean, there's nothing more to it than that. We're finding issues. We're sending it to the right people to deal with, and then following up to make sure that they did it. So in our second drive around, we had that original list of stuff we identified, so we could go and look to see if it had been repaired yet or not, so that we could follow up with the appropriate department or company or what have you. So it's it, like Taylor said, it's going to take not just one person. It's going to take everybody.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think getting the business owners involved, I think, will be a big benefit to everybody because again, they're there in front of their business and on their street, on their corner every day, and we are not. We're here doing what we do. So I think that will help us a great deal.
Okay, thank you.
What did we determine for a budget for us? Did that go through yet for you yet? Last time you said that you were still for line item for the CRA. Yes, that we weren't in the red, we were in the positive.
For facade,
For facade.
we have not worked that out yet.
Okay.
So I'm hopeful before the 24th I'll have a little bit of a better direction on that.
Okay.
But stay tuned.
Got it.
Okay. Anybody else further comments? Otherwise, I'm going to close the meeting unless Taylor, you have something else.
Oh no, there was one thing. There we go. It almost left me, but I caught it right before. The art committee will be meeting next week to review dumpster enclosure mural submissions. We open that to local applicants only. We received 28 proposals for that mural from local artists. I had the pleasure of going through all 28 and verifying 3 references for all 28 and their resumes and their background and checking into everything that they claimed. And they are all quite incredible. I will be very blunt again. This is going to be a big push. They are looking at this on the 20th. The art committee is used to having like 2 or 3 meetings to make a decision, and I have given them 1 meeting. You have 2 hours, pick. That comes to you guys the following Monday on the 24th, and whereas their meeting, it's the only agenda item, on your meeting it's like 1 of 5 agenda items. So buckle up, it'll be a rapid fire, but hopefully they will bring you 1 candidate. I will say one really great thing with the art committee thus far is when they have made their recommendation, it, knock on wood, has been unanimous. So as long as we have a unanimous recommendation, that comes to you on the 24th, and then exactly a week later it goes to city council, with the goal and intention here being to have this mural completed or as close to completed as possible prior to opening of the beaches April 27th. So we've got a pretty big, we're pushing this one through pretty aggressively. So if you feel like it's being shoved at you, it is. Just saying. So we're very excited though. And there's a lot of really great ones. I'm glad I'm not a committee member and I don't have to make the decision. So, but that is all, Mr. Chairman.
With that, thank you all. I appreciate all the input this afternoon, and hopefully you found it productive, and we'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.